Warning, the Slayer has entered the facility.
I never really thought I would get into painting bigger statues. I was always interested in the function of miniatures that I could use for my tabletop games. But I've followed a few 3D printing Patreon profiles for over a year now and never printed anything they made. And when Photosmint put out the Doomguy this summer, I had to print it. Printed it on my resin printer, all that went fine, and I wanted to paint it. And I believe I have learned some lessons that I carry over now into my mini painting by painting something bigger. It's like a drastically different perspective that has very much improved my overall painting skills. For this Doomguy, I am using speed paints. I got the basic army painter, speed paint bundle, the whole kit, shebang, whatever. I started using these to paint my goblin set. I showed these off in my last mini painting video, and someone in the comments kindly pointed out that, yeah, it might seem silly to use speed paints when you're used to doing things already with normal mini paints, but do you really want to put in all that time for every little goblin and mob that your party might encounter for a few minutes, instead of putting all that time and quality into the player characters? And that really stuck with me. So sometime in the spring or early summer, I picked up that army painter kit and started painting my goblins, and they're turning out great. I had scripted a whole video about this and just never got around to it. I don't know if I'll still make it, but I'm loving the speed paint process for just quick and easy minis. Especially it's gotten me to do my zenithal priming a lot better, and it saved me a lot of time, and I really like the results. So I tried it here on this statue. I figured worst case it would provide me a kind of guideline to go over with the normal paints, but I also wanted to try out using paint markers for some of the details, because the crevices, the nooks, the crannies, and the metallic bits are so much bigger on a model like this compared to your standard 28mm mini or whatever. This is a pretty beefy statue. I could have printed it bigger, but I just went with this side for now. And I am blown away by the results. So what you've been watching is me painting the statue with the speed paint. So I already zenithal primed it, so I've got black everywhere, white on top. And I was going in and I pulled up an image of Doomguy from Doom Eternal and was just trying to go with the color scheme. What I wound up doing was painting the face mask of his helmet orange, or like a orangey, bronzy, metallic kind of color, which ends up looking a lot more like Master Chief than Doomguy. But in my defense, some of the earlier iterations of Doomguy from way back in the day had a more bronze style face mask on the helmet. I know it's more blue, but I really liked the contrast of the orange. And so I went through, painted it up, and I learned a lot from painting this. I learned how to use speed paints at all, like I'd been using them, but to really like cover a lot of space with them. I learned that you really have to commit to a single layer, like commit to the paint that you're doing, because the issue with speed paints is their transparency. Unlike the normal paints I use, even when I thin them out, they are mostly opaque, whereas with the speed paints, they are translucent from the break. And so with traditional paints on my minis, I would build up from dark to light and do the highlights last, whereas on this statue, I frequently ran into the issue of the more paint you add, the darker it gets. And so there's a big piece of his chest plate that I originally had this nice gradient down to a shadow at the bottom. And I wound up making some mistakes around the finer details, the little circles and things like that on his chest. And in order to try to correct for that, I'd come back with the other color of paint. But what I ended up doing was just making it darker and darker. And eventually a lot more of the chest plate was in shadow than I wanted. Now, if I were doing a better job of blending traditional mini paints with speed paints, I probably would have been able to recover this better. But I kind of just accepted that it would look like it's in a lot of shadow. For the mask, I gave it a very opaque with like titanium white coverage so that it had a super bright base to work off of to be like the brightest piece on the statue. And then I went in there with some oranges and some browns, and lastly a brass kind of gold metallic paint on top to really give it that sheen. And then I used the silver and bronze paint marker from this paint marker set to give the armor lines. There are some lines around his like shoulder pads that have a silver finish, as well as a couple gold inserts on the chest piece, and give some metallic looks to some of the smaller details on the armor. And then finally, I went in through with a black paint pen and then a couple fine liner pens that I've had, and just really got in those crevices, all the little nooks and crannies and outlines, and gave it almost kind of like, as a result of this, because of the severity that the translucent the speed paints kind of layer on top of each other, I feel like I've almost achieved a nearly like cell shaded kind of style, which I've been really interested in. Around this time, I was watching a bunch of those shorts where people were painting up the Dragon Ball Z figures with the like super hardcore cell shaded style, and I was really impressed with that. And I wasn't intending to do this here, but that's kind of how it came out. And ultimately, I am blown away with the result. I wish I could have recovered his chest plate a little bit better. There are a couple little mistakes, both in the 3D print itself as well as my paint job, that could obviously be better. But like, for my first statue of this size and caliber, I am over the moon with it. I gave it a quick glossy coat of varnish a couple times, and the colors pop. It is shiny. It looks badass. And I learned a lot. I think speed paints are really what I'm going to be spending a lot of my time on with mini painting moving forward, just to get the bulk of I have a ton of minis I want to paint, to just get the bulk of those done. And then I can focus the normal paints a bit more on doing some much more detailed and thorough, like main character kind of paint jobs. I do have a couple other bigger statues that I printed from Photos Mint over the summer that I still need to paint. I've got a Karlach from Baldur's Gate 3. I've got a Metroid suit. I am stoked to do both of those. I'm currently at the time messing around with more bigger picture acrylic painting stuff, but I will get back to it. I just wanted to share this. This is, of all the many related things I have painted, this is the one I am the most stoked with, and I've been wanting to share it for a long time, and I just wanted to share it with you. This is, I think speed paints are obviously a very great way to go, either as a base coat or if you just need to move quickly, which on a big statue like this, absolutely. If I have not been getting along with my wet palette, so doing the whole statue with my traditional paints would have been pretty costly in terms of time, because I would have just it would have just taken so long to get that much paint on there. Whereas speed paints are almost like a wash in and of themselves, but then they dry a lot more solid and opaque, and I love it. And I really think paint pens as an accessory to mini painting absolutely changes the game. I can't believe more people don't talk about this. The paint pens make my life so much easier. Try the accuracy I can get from a fine, or even the fat sometimes, pin tip versus a paintbrush, even my tiny ones, especially on like bigger outlines like this, night and day difference. And a fine liner pen for the little nooks and crannies instead of trying to use a brush for that. So much less bleed and so much less of that coffee stained wash look. Absolutely love it. I hope you enjoyed. Go check out my other recent video on some glitch art stuff if you're interested in the other arts and crafts I'm into. And remember to be kind. Rewind.